Hello everyone. Myself, Dr. Dinesh Kumar Bagga, Professor and Head, Department of Orthodontics, School of Dental Sciences, Sharda University. Today's topic of presentation is moving beyond p-value. Whenever we conduct any experimental study or randomized control trial, we take a hypothesis, and then to test a hypothesis, we run an experiment and we collect the data, we analyze it, interpret it, and finally we reach the conclusion. And in that process, we reject or not reject that hypothesis based on the p-value. The p-value is supposed to reject the false null hypothesis, whereas it should not reject the true null hypothesis. If it does so, there is no error. So result of the test should match the actual state of nature. That is the reality. Then there is no error. But there are possibilities. You might get the difference. You might not get the difference. And in that process, we don't know what is in reality. Is there any difference or there is no difference? So two types of errors are possible due to wrong decision by incorrectly rejecting or failing to reject the null hypothesis. When you reject the true null hypothesis, when you should not, or you are not able to reject false null hypothesis when you should. So that means this is a wrong decision and errors have taken place. And one error occurs at one time. When you finish your study with statistically significant result, there are chances that you could have done type 1 error. When you have finished your study with insignificant difference, there are chances that you could have done type 2 error. Why I'm saying so? Because when you get the difference, you have a doubt. There could not be any difference. That is the possibility. If you don't get the difference, then again you have doubt. There could be difference, but you are not able to detect it. So these two errors need to be addressed before the experiment. Now, to understand these errors, I have taken an analogy from a famous story, The Boy and the Wolf. The boy cried wolf. People rushed to rescue him as they believed that there was a wolf, but there was no wolf. Next time, again, the boy cried wolf. People didn't rush to rescue him as they believed that there was no wolf, but this time there was a wolf. Now, wolf refers to actual condition. Presence of wolf means presence of difference, presence of impact, effect, change. No wolf means no difference. But people's belief is your study result. Whether you believe that there is a difference or there is no difference. Now, first time also there was a wrong decision. There was no wolf, but people believed that there was a wolf. This is a type 1 error. When you get significant result, but there was no difference. Next time, when people did not come out, they believed that there was no wolf, but actually there was a wolf. So when there is a difference and your study failed to detect that difference, failed to acknowledge that difference, that is a type 2 error. So this type 1 error is set at 5% and type 2 error is set at 20%. And this 5% type 1 error acts as a cutoff mark, which shows that the less than 5% will be making the result significant. Whenever there is no difference, the null hypothesis is true, it will not reject the null hypothesis. So less than 5%, at less than 5% error, if it rejects, that means it makes it statistically significant. And more than 5%, it will fail to reject the null hypothesis. Rejecting the null hypothesis means the difference is real. It is not due to sampling variability. Then type 2 error is when there is a difference and the study failed to detect that difference. That means study is not so powerful. It fails to detect that difference. So beta means failure to detect the difference between group when one exists. So 1 minus beta is the probability of rejecting a false null hypothesis when it exists by not making type 2 error or beta error. That means the correct decision of rejecting a false null hypothesis is denoted by 1 minus beta, and that is the statistical power. And when this power increases, means beta decreases. And it is set as 80% power, means the chances of type 2 error is 20%. So power analysis done for sample size calculation. Sample size calculation is based on the effect size, the alpha error, and the beta error, or in other way 1 minus beta statistical power. So significance level or alpha error we have fixed at 5%, statistical power at 80%. So effect size you can get from the previous study, or you can get it from the pilot study, and then you can calculate the sample size. So you need to have a minimum sample size to get power of 80%. If sample size is small, then your study might not get the difference when one exists. So you need to get that much larger sample size to detect that difference. So for bigger effects, you can detect with a smaller sample size, and for smaller effects, you need bigger sample size. So significance tests are highly dependent on sample size. So that also puts a question mark on the p-value. So smaller sample size gives it less power, and even the important differences are not detectable. And when sample size becomes too much large, then even trivial effects which are of no clinical importance can be detected, can be revealed. However, they are not of clinical relevance, but your result is statistically significant. So in other words, a research outcome of statistical significance may be of a little clinical significance, whereas statistically insignificant research outcome may be of clinical significance. So that shows that you have to remain cautious. So an increase in sample size may make an insignificant difference to be significant difference. So it may convert insignificant difference into significant difference. Again, that becomes the point of debate. So power analysis is very important to calculate the sample size for a given effect size with an estimated type 1 and type 2 error. So when you know effect size and type 1 and type 2 error are fixed, you can calculate the sample size. Alpha level, normally it is taken 0.05, that is 5%. But sometimes we can take stringent alpha level to reduce the type 1 error. You can reduce the type 1 error because whenever you have true null hypothesis, it won't be rejected easily. So you can reduce it. Because rejecting is difficult, so even false null hypothesis rejection will also become difficult. So in that case, type 2 error is increased. On the other hand, when we take lenient alpha level, for example 10%, then rejecting becomes easy. So you can imagine that null hypothesis rejecting becomes easy. So you will reduce the type 2 error. But at the same time, type 1 error increases because rejecting is become easy. So true null hypothesis rejection is also become easier. So in other words, the more we try to minimize the type 1 error, the more likelihood of a type 2 error creeping in would be, and vice versa. As there is a delicate balance, so you have to choose which one is better. Is it better to say there is an effect when there is not type 1 error, or is it better to say there is no effect when there is, that is type 2 error? So which error is more acceptable? So 0.05 is taken by the researcher as a good balance between these two issues. So example from general life, understanding functioning of police and judiciary on a statistical basis. Police prefers type 1 error and judiciary prefers type 2 error. For police, it is better to nab the non-guilty even with insufficient evidence for interrogation, suspecting him to be guilty as false positive. So they prefer false positive rather than sparing the guilty with insufficient evidence, treating him to be non-guilty. So that is dangerous. But for judiciary, it is the reverse way. It is better to release the guilty with insufficient evidence on bail, considering him to be non-guilty. False negative. So judiciary prefers false negative rather than sending the non-guilty to jail, considering him to be guilty. That is false positive. So judiciary prefers false negative. The police prefer false positive. Same way, when we come to the medical investigation, we say whenever there is medical screening, we prefer type 1 error, because false positive is better. False positive will lead to inclusion of some non-diseased individuals into group of diseased individuals. So they will undergo confirmatory tests. If we prefer false negative, then it is dangerous, because that will lead to inclusion of some diseased individuals into non-diseased, and that they will not be undergone further tests or anything. They will be left as non-diseased, and they may develop some complications, or that may lead to death also. So given the choice, we will prefer type 1 error. But as far as organ removal in cancer is considered, type 2 error is more acceptable. There need to be high degree of evidence before the organ removal. We cannot remove organ of a healthy type. False positive error of recommending organ removal in cancer-free individuals is not acceptable. So given the choice, we would rather accept a false negative, that is deferring the organ removal in cancer patients, rather than a false positive, that is organ removal in cancer-free individuals. Now, research in literature must inform the research outcome in a manner which can readily be understood by clinicians and must guide the clinical practice. On the contrary, p-value continues to be misinterpreted, misused to distort the inferences, resulting in contradictory interpretation of research outcomes. A perception of p-value of 0.01 being more clinically meaningful than one of 0.05 is not true. It only shows that this has got higher evidence of the difference, but it is not related with clinical importance. And larger sample size can achieve statistical significance, even with a difference of little clinical significance. So whatever we get because of the power of the statistics. It is nothing to be related with the clinical significance. Then 0.05 is arbitrary. It may be changed by the researcher. And why 0.05, why not 0.04, that is also debated. And then it is nothing to do with the truthness of null hypothesis. Less than 5% or more than 5%, it does not tell you that the hypothesis is true or not. Only it tells you that what is the probability of data being supporting to the particular hypothesis or not. So that has to be understood. The statistical analysis of randomized clinical trial must guide the clinical practice, but p-values continue to distort. When many people have raised the question, they call it conceptual error. Since 1920, it is introduced by Ronald Fisher. It is still the most common approach. But at this point of time, since statistical significance does not measure size of effects or importance of results, we need to go for the supplementing the research outcome with other statistics to support this, some complementary analysis. So that will expand the approach to statistical thinking beyond p-value. So there is need to go for clinical significance inclusion also, not only by reporting the statistical significance. So the treatment trial should be analyzed for both statistical significance and clinical meaningfulness. So we need to move beyond the basic question, is there a difference, to the next level? Is the difference big enough to have clinical meaningfulness? So the effect size is an important tool. Both are complementary analysis, both should be used. So we need to know the magnitude, and this effect size has generally been limited to meta-analysis. That should be included in original research also. And so both should be used. And now come to the effect size. What are those statistics beyond p-value as the topic suggests, there are two categories, the effect size matrix. One is D family, one is R family. Comparing the groups is with D family to know the difference, and determining the strength of association with R family, that means correlation. So first of all, D family, whenever we conduct t-test, we compare the two groups. When we know that there is a difference, to know the size, we take the mean difference. Cohen's D has the standardized mean difference. Standardized mean difference means mean difference normalized to pooled standard deviation. From both the groups, whenever the sample size is equal from both the groups, we can take standard deviation from both the groups, and we can take the average. You can square it, you can take the average, take under root. Some people take it just like that, just add and take half of that, that means average SD. So pooled SD, so normalized to pooled SD, and you can express the mean difference in terms of SD. So there is no unit. Whenever sample size is different, then there is a variation of Cohen's D by Hedges G, because sample size is different. So you have to add the weightage according to the sample size. And whenever SDs are too much different, then you take SD of control group rather than pooling them. In ANOVA test, we can go for Cohen's F test, in which some of the deviations of sample means from the combined sample mean is normalized to the combined sample SD. This test does not distinguish which means differ, but rather just determines whether all means are the same. Other effect size measures are eta squared and partial eta squared. However, in one-way ANOVA, eta squared and partial eta squared behave in the same manner, but otherwise it is different. Eta squared is calculated as the ratio of between groups sum of the squares to total sum of squares. But in case of partial eta squared, it is the ratio of between groups sum of the squares to the sum of between groups of group sum of squares and the error sum of squares. Whenever dichotomous variables are there, we use chi-square test. For chi-square test, we should go for appropriate effect size odds ratio that describes the likelihood of an outcome occurring in the treatment group compared with the likelihood of outcome occurring in the control group. But here I must tell you that this odds ratio is very good, but it depends on the individual value also, odds control and odds treatment. For example, if odds ratio is 1.5, and if you have odds control 0.002 and odds treatment 0.003, then also it is 1.5. In the other example, if we take odds control 0.5 and odds treatment 0.75, again it is 1.5, but there is a difference. In next example, the other example, it has the higher value because odds individual value are more. Now determining the strength of association between variables, that is R family, Pearson's correlation coefficient is used, whether it is the positive linear relationship or negative relationship, depending on which way the other dependent variable is increasing with the independent or moving in the other direction. One is increasing, the other is decreasing, or there is no linear relationship. We can go for coefficient determination by squaring it, R square. That will tell you the how much variance is shared by the dependent and independent variables. Will come in the next slide. Capital R square is used for multiple coefficient of multiple determination in multiple regression analysis. Same way. RPB is point by serial correlation coefficient, where we have dichotomous variable. And Spearman's rank correlation coefficient rho is for non-parametric association, measured just like Pearson's. How to interpret this effect size? Cohen's D, as I told you, that mean difference normalized to pooled SD. So you can talk in terms of how much SD there is a difference. This mean difference is how much SD, 1 SD, 1.5 SD, 2 SD, 2.1 SD. So you can know this magnitude. And same way, R is telling you the strength of association. R square in regression analysis, coefficient of determination tells that how much variance of in the dependent variable can be explained by the independent variable. Suppose if we have R is equal to 0.9, so 81% variance For example, we have taken mouth breathing and malocclusion. So 81% of the variance in the dependent variable, for example, malocclusion, can be explained by the independent variable, for example, mouth breathing. So statisticians have determined qualitative descriptors also, that this effect size is in the value. Now it is a small, medium, or large. So this is the chart which shows that how to determine it. For example, odds ratio. If you want at least a medium effect size, it should be 2.5 or more. If it becomes 4, it becomes large. It becomes 10, very large. So same way, Cohen's d, 0.2, 0.5, 0.8, 1.3. That is small, medium, large, and very large. R, 0.1, 0.3, 0.5, 0.7. Again, small, medium, large, and very large. Cohen's F, 3 classification, 0.1, 0.25, 0.40. Eta squared, 0.01, 0.06, 0.14. Small, medium, and large. So Cohen's D and Pearson R are very important. These are the main groups, and they are convertible also. In one study, if you find D is there but R is missing, or R is there, D is missing, you can convert it R to D or D to R, and this is the comparison, that D.2 is equal to R.1. Then further, Rosenthal and Rosno has refined it further, and he has given with the bit change. For example, if medium 0.3 is equivalent to 0.5D, he has said that it is not 0.3, 0.24 R is equivalent to 0.5. So this, about R equivalent has been derived, and that is shown there. So mainly in the end, what we learn here, that the interpretations derived from the statistical significance testing alone have the limitations in applicability in clinical decision making in clinical practice. Therefore, clinicians and clinical researchers need to focus on clinical significance beyond statistical significance. The statistical significance indicates the likelihood that the observed effect is real or due to chance, whereas the effect size index indicates the magnitude of the observed effect or relationship between variables. Although the routine use of effect sizes has usually been limited to meta-analysis for combining and comparing estimates from different studies, the effect size should be calculated and reported along with statistical significance in primary studies for interpretation of the research outcome. The statistical significance and the effect size indices are complementary analysis. So these are the references. Uh, Thank you very much for patient hearing. Thank you.